During the 4th millennium BCE, evidence shows that public institutions developed at large settlements across Mesopotamia. However, these early cities did not survive, and very little is known about how they evolved, functioned, and collapsed. As part of the Sirwan Regional Project, a new study related to public institutions at one of these sites, Shakhi Kora in northern Iraq, was recently published in the journal Antiquity. This research finally gives us an insight into why such systems may have been abandoned in northern Mesopotamia before re-emerging more than 1,500 years later in the Bronze Age. During the Late Chalcolithic period, centralized public institutions emerged in Mesopotamia in what is today Iraq, Western Iran, Syria, and southeast Turkey. These institutions existed at several settlements and were characterized by their ability to receive labor and goods from the wider community. One of these sites is Uruk in southern Iraq, which grew from a village to encompass several hundred hectares. Monumental structures that were probably temples were built there, and there's evidence for record keeping and the redistribution of goods. However, the extent to which public institutions exerted control and how hierarchical society became as a result of them has been much debated by scholars over the years. Economic growth and large-scale production may simply have benefited urban communities rather than having been the result of centralized control. However, by the late 4th millennium BCE, figures of authority began to appear in Mesopotamian iconography, indicating the likelihood of an emerging elite. During the 60s and 70s, archaeologists suggested that southern Mesopotamian sites, such as Uruk, were bureaucratically controlled, whereas similar settlements in the north were likely its trade colonies. In contrast, work in Syria and southeast Turkey showed that such peripheral large-scale settlements with public institutions developed separately from and even prior to regular contact with the Uruk world. There's also no evidence for the large-scale movement of goods from southern Mesopotamia to these sites, and the inhabitants appear to have integrated with local communities. This has led scholars to suggest that such peripheral settlements were not trade colonies after all, but communities that left southern Mesopotamia to escape the emerging state and increased control over them. So in late Chalcolithic Mesopotamia, there's plenty of evidence for centralized institutional activity probably related to a social hierarchy, but this did not all necessarily follow the same pattern as Uruk, an emerging and influential southern Mesopotamian city. The archaeological site of Shakhi Kora is located alongside the Sirwan River in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. It covered around 8 hectares during the late Chalcolithic. A single sherd of painted pottery belonging to the Ubaid style was found there, which suggests a very early occupation date in the 5th millennium BCE. However, most of the excavated materials date to between 4200 and 3200 BCE, and a small amount belong to the late 4th or early 3rd millennium. This means that Shakhi Kora was the largest and longest occupied settlement along the Sirwan Diyala River in the late Chalcolithic. The site was first discovered in 2018, prompting surveying and testing. Large-scale excavations then took place in 2019, 2022, and 2023, as well as a magnetic gradiometer survey. This survey indicated an urban environment made up of several large buildings, open spaces, densely packed areas, and a perimeter wall. A total of 728 square meters have been exposed via excavations so far, and 6 phases of occupation have been identified. Relevant to this specific study is Area 1 on the river-facing side of the site to the east. Buildings associated with the large-scale production and distribution of food were found there, and these date to phases 2 through 4. One feature of institutional activity is the large-scale processing and distribution of food in return for labor, rather than production and consumption on a household level. Another institutional building was found belonging to Phase 5 and covering 600 square meters. The Phase 2 architecture is made up of a series of rooms partitioned by a long mud brick wall. Large quantities of pottery vessels, including rimmed bowls and a type referred to as flower pots, were unearthed there. A hearth and other ash deposits were found to contain a large amount of faunal remains. These rooms then fell out of use, with the area being leveled in preparation for a new structure in Phase 3. A similar architectural layout was followed, but with a large indoor space, around 20 meters squared of which has been excavated so far. Here, several stacks of complete upturned beveled rimmed bowls were found arranged in pairs on the floor, leaning against the southern wall. A grinding slab was also found sat on the floor. In the large indoor space, archaeologists discovered a deep collapse horizon measuring 0.5 meter and containing mud brick, blackened soil, pottery sherds of flower pots and rimmed bowls, chipped stones, and grinding stones. The contents of the building suggest its primary function was for the processing and distribution of food. However, it's not clear what led to its collapse. This destruction fill was leveled and sealed off, and ashy hearth and ceramic fragments suggest that the area was once again used for food production and distribution. During Phase 5, the area was rebuilt and consisted of a large hall with 2 or maybe 3 rows of squared plastered pillars made of compacted earth, as well as a food production area in the east and a storage area alongside an outdoor space to the west. In the south, there is a midden where beveled, rimmed bowls and food remains have been discarded. The large pillared hall had an underfloor drainage system made up of clay pipes that are similar to those found at Tel Brak, Habuba Kabira and Gerda Kala. Another drain was made out of 9 large jars where the bases and rims had been cut off for this purpose, as well as a large ceramic cylinder. Close to one of the pillars, pottery vessels, bones, an ashy matrix, and some other artifacts were found all together. These look as though they were part of an intentional ritual deposition. A few centimeters above this assemblage, as part of other Phase 5 deposits, a stone figurine of a reclining ram was found that is reminiscent of sculptures found at the Inanna complex at Uruk. The food production area to the east was made up of an L-shaped wall surrounded by complete and fragmentary pottery, which included vessels for cooking and consumption. Groundstone artifacts were also found in this area, as well as a pebbled floor leading to a U-shaped mud brick feature that probably contained an oven. A cylinder seal found above the pillared hall, as well as clay wall cones discovered in most contexts, further suggest the institutional nature of this building. It was abandoned, and during this long abandonment phase, the mud brick walls eroded, covering assemblages on the floor. During the later 4th to the early 3rd millennium BCE, it was then reoccupied, but on a much smaller scale. Phases 1 through 3 at Shakhi Kora are characterized by a local material culture specific to northern Mesopotamia at that time. Wide flower pots, club-headed bowls, rimmed bowls, and rimmed jars make up most of the pottery assemblages in Phases 2 and 3, with a small number of southern Mesopotamian and Uruk pottery types found in Phase 1. The closest parallels to the local pottery have been found at Kurdi Kala and Kani Shale in the west-central Zagros Piedmonts. During Phase 4, a wider range of pottery types from southern Mesopotamia were introduced, including pattern burnished vessels and nose-lugged globular jars. Analyses of lipid residues in beveled rimmed bowls from Phases 3 through 5 show that they were used to serve and consume different kinds of foods, including meat, dairy, and plant-based products. However, most were used for the distribution of meat or marrow broths or stews. The archaeobotanical assemblage at the site is made up of einkorn wheat, barley, and fig, and the faunal assemblages are mostly made up of caprines with some cattle, pig, dog, and deer. These faunal remains indicate that the extraction of marrow and grease were the main butchery and cooking techniques used. This means that animal husbandry was more important to the institutional economy of Shakhi Kora than cereal cultivation. From an environmental perspective, the site is located in the zone of uncertainty, an area where rainfall is unpredictable, which would have prevented the inhabitants from relying on a mostly agricultural economy. The architecture, technology, mineralogical choices and pottery associated with Phase 5 indicate stronger cultural ties to southern Mesopotamia. A regional survey covering around 4,000 square kilometers shows that there were 42 settlements during the Late Chalcolithic along the course of the lower Sirwan River and its tributaries. Apart from Shakhi Kora and Malakuna 1, these were all small villages and hamlets. The material culture of these sites was local in character and had little association with that of southern Mesopotamia. The pillared hall complex belonging to Phase 5 was abandoned after a date falling between 3631 and 3337. This was before the 5.2 Ka global climate event, so the abandonment was not likely to have been a result of this drop in precipitation. Instead, the authors of the paper proposed that this abandonment was due to a rejection of urbanism and public institutions, which by then had taken on a southern Mesopotamian character. This followed a long period of experimentation with centralized socio-political organization, which to begin with had been culturally local before taking on Uruk influences. That's it. A special shout out goes to my patrons and channel members. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.